Brought to you by Nooganomics.com, our show, the David Tulis program. Chief sponsor, Nooganomics.com, the website for the man who matters. Not a popular website. Okay, it's not popular. You won't find pretty girls on there or headlines about stars or country music, anything like that. You'll find those serious, studious, workmanlike reviews of the current scene with a view toward reform, a view toward reformation. I am a Christian. I worship God, saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. And I'm working to reform myself. First of all, that's the main duty of a Christian, is to reform himself, to be more a picture of godliness. In fact, that's the title of a book by a Puritan writer, Thomas Watson, that I sent to my son, well marked. I had well marked it, and I asked him Sunday or Saturday in a phone conversation, had he read it? And he said, "Well, I've moved and I've left it with my other books in Atlanta." So there it is, and I'm holding in my hand here, The Great Gain of Godliness by Thomas Watson. Well marked, edifying, driving me to my authority, which is the Scriptures. And as I reform myself, I take heed that there are duties under the Great Commission for great ones, great people, important people, not like me. I'm just a common man like you, my listener. But there are those who have authority, legal authority, political authority, economic authority, and they are held to a higher standard because their decisions, their actions affect the wealth and prosperity, the morals, if you will, of thousands or millions of other people. So if you run a central bank that is inflationary and in issuing a non-referential currency, and your profit comes from the declining value of that currency held by dolts in Chattanooga, right? Commoners in Chattanooga, retirees in Hamilton County, by widows in Saudi Daisy, by common farming type folks in Ray County, and you're diminishing their buying power. You are a robber. You are a thief. And no amount of prayer, no amount of church going, no amount of breastfeeding and holy thoughts are going to save you from the great crime in which you are a participant. Right? You are a participant in a great crime, a theft of everyone who holds that currency, of which you are the steward, right? As the head of the issuing corporation. You have high responsibility. So the Christian argument is that we have duties before God personally and then culturally as well. Every government, every magistrate, every judge has, despite what he might claim about the rule of law, the Tennessee Code annotated, he has a duty before God. Not just for, as they say, the rule of law, as Ron Powers mentions in his application for a circuit court judge. That's important, but that's not the only thing. There is justice, and which is it? Is it Attorney Powers? Is justice greater, or is the rule of law greater? And we have to say that if you're an authority, biblically speaking, justice is greater. The rule of law, after all, was the defense of the defendants in Nuremberg, right? It's always the defense. Well, I was just following the law at the time. And the reason that's worth mentioning is that there's a law above the law. There's a law above the Constitution. There's a law above the Tennessee Code, and we'd have to say that it is God Himself. And so these are things that we consider, and then we say, okay, how do we take this understanding of how these different laws work, these different claims upon obedience, right? How they work in Chattanooga, how they work in your life. And so we always want to look for justice, not just the rule of law, because after all, Gerald McCormick and Todd Gardenhire, senator and state representative, they have a very high view of the police departments across the state, and in one form or the other, either have pushed the Blue Lives Matter legislative effort last year for the 2017 General Assembly. Not sure where these bills are going to go in the future, but Gerald McCormick, who was the House Speaker, I think the House Speaker, he wants there to be the felonialization of a assault against a police officer. If you hit a police officer, then that's not just a misdemeanor; it is a felony. So these are protections beyond those already there in spades for this class of state worker. These are state workers in Chattanooga, the Chattanooga Police Department, they're city employees, right? They're city employees in East Ridge. They're city employees, and they have a legal authority to execute people. I just want you to know that your police officer hired by your mayor and his personnel department can execute someone in cold blood, and it's done legally, it's done extrajudicially, and it's done according to the rules, right? There are rules that allow that to be done. And there's not enough impetus yet here in Southeast Tennessee to retard that great exercise of power, that liberating power that the state has to do that, and to have excellent protections and immunities, effectively immunities, for its staff people, whether in the state itself or in corporations created by the state. That would be Chattanooga, which is a municipal corp. It has that delegated authority to pass on. Now, I mentioned this Blue Life Matter effort because the tide, I think, of public sentiment more strongly elsewhere than here is strongly against that kind of favor that is sought by police unions, police departments, and sort of lackeys in the nonprofit sector that continually talk about how extraordinarily dangerous being a police officer is. And the danger to police officers and deputies has gone down sharply for a long time, and it's nowhere near as risky as many other professions. Now, I was just by the way, I mentioned our Nooganomics.com, our sponsor. Go there and read John Whitehead's excellent analysis of this problem of the legal immunities that make state actors immune. In other words, they can't do wrong. They cannot do wrong, and that is a grievous process. But before I mention a couple of details, Jackie Neal, for example, the San Antonio deputy who's putting his hands in women's crotches and finally brought to bar. I want to mention something about scale, right? The scale problem. People who have their own idea of law, their own idea of what right and wrong, their own ideology. Often, you go to the university, and that's where your ideology is best strengthened, and everyone around you is supposed to think the same way. There's this uniformity of thought at the university, probably even UTC. I'm willing to bet probably even at UT. Ideologies allow for these things that are gross. What we say, we all have to admit, even if we're pagans, right? Even if we're the darkest pagan, even if we're self-avowed atheists, we self-consciously atheistic, we will say that these things are wrong, and we all agree. We can say that rape is right sometimes, right? Some people defend that. We can say that child abuse is right sometimes. There are people who defend that in the queer lobby. But we have a mass murder of the scale brought to our attention by E.S. Someen, the law professor, in his column in the Washington Post. We all agree. We can somehow agree. We somehow accept a divine standard, at least momentarily, that Mao, who killed 45 million people, Mao was a bad man. We're a bad man because the number, the number's just so great that we just have to shake our heads. Even though the people who lost their lives, millions of them to famine, even though they were the commonest Chinese peasant, we still, as we consider the numbers, we just have to recoil. A catastrophe of gargantuan proportions in 1958 to 1962. At least 2 or 3 million people were executed or tortured to death. Now, that's a huge number to die by execution and torture. Now, most of the others died from a market intervention in the economy. That's what happened in the Great Leap Forward. Competitors. Mao thought that he could catapult his country past competitors by herding villagers into giant communes. And he's quoting here a book, Frank Dikötter, and that book is called Mao's Great Famine, published. That author published an essay in History Today, and Mao was seeking what he calls a utopian paradise. Everything is collectivized, right? People had their work, their homes, their land belongings, and livelihood seized from them for the greater good, right? The greater good. In collective canteens, food was distributed by the spoonful. Think there of the prospect for private profit, right? For abuse. Your merit would give you the two spoonfuls, right? If you were good and said what the party wanted you to say, you got 2 spoonfuls. As incentives to work removed, here is the market intervention. Coercion and violence were used instead to compel famished farmers to perform labor on poorly planned irrigation projects while their fields were neglected. So you have a higher calling. We have a superintendency, right? The local maestro superintendent. He was a superintendent. That's why the word superintendent is to me a frightening term. It is frightening that we have a very fine and good man, Dr. Brian Johnson. That's his office, though, to superintend. His intention supersedes and superintends those of others. And so among those who died, there's this reference in Frank Decatur's essay in History Today. When a boy stole a handful of grain in Hunan village, local boss Xiang Dechang forced his father to bury him alive. The case of Wang Zhou was reported to the central leadership. One of his ears was chopped off, his legs were tied with iron wire, a 10-kilogram stone was dropped on his back, and then he was branded with a sizzling tool. Punishment for digging up a potato, right? The people's potato cannot be privately stolen by a greedy person, and so the torture is essential. Now, you see, if you're in that context, if you're in China, how can you think anything different? How can not everybody not just agree that this is the way it is, right? Force makes things the way they are. Because the way things are as they are, we accept things. We accept many, many things. People in China, though they were horrified, they said, well, that's just the way it is. We can't argue against it. There's who's to say that that's not, that's not right. That's what's happening. That's got to be right. And so might makes right is the result of having a rejection. Might makes right is what you have when you reject an external standard, a standard outside of man, outside of any country, a standard that's outside of the Tennessee Code, outside of the federal code, the U.S. Code, outside of the Constitution, right? Those are authorities that have claims of jurisdiction downward. And there has to be a claim beyond those. And if you don't have God, the one true God who's revealed himself, then you have to have these tyrannies. And there's no real way, if you're being consistent, there's no real way you can say these are wrong. In San Antonio, there's an officer named Jackie Neal in 2006. He put his hands, he was accused of putting his hands inside a woman's panties, lifting up her skirt, feeling her breast during a routine traffic stop. He was he remained on the police force. In 2007, next year, he was accused of digitally penetrating another woman. Still, he wasn't fired or disciplined. In 2013, a very, very patient commander, he was serving as supervisor of the department's youth program. He was suspended for 3 days for having sex with a teenage girl participating in the program. And Reuters reports Neal never lost a dime in pay or a day off patrol. The union contract allowed him to serve the suspension using vacation days. Later that same year, he was arrested on charges that he handcuffed a woman in the rear seat of his police vehicle and raped her. He was eventually fined $5,000 and sentenced to 14 months in prison with 5 months off for work and education. The taxpayers got saddled with a $500,000 claim to settle the case. And when the city council tried to amend the ordinance, the unions flexed their media muscle. Of course, it's a hateful thing to bring any kind of restraint against officers who are there to protect and serve, right? Protect and serve the public. Gerald McCormick is a legislator who has been listening to the police lobby. Right? Probably the most powerful lobby in the state is the police lobby. You can't find out much about them. They don't answer phone calls of journalists. And the things that they have are called leobors. Leobors are law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights. Leobor, it sounds like it's either a large bore musket, like a Kentucky long rifle, or something of a sexual nature. But that's what it's called, a leobor. It protects officers from being treated as we are treated during a criminal investigation. And if you read Nooganomics.com, you're familiar somewhat with this material, as I have been mining the policy manual of the Chattanooga Police Department, and I've got a lot of work to do still there. If God's good providence just gives me an extra couple hours. People who are harassed, they're arrested, they don't know their rights, they don't know how to assert themselves, they don't know how to stop talking, and so they are in grievous trouble. But if you're an officer, according to Nooganomics.com in its report today, If a department decides to pursue a complaint against an officer, the department must notify the officer and his union. The officers must be informed of the complainants and their testimony against him before he's being questioned, right? So that's also, you don't get that, right? You don't get that. No one else gets that. During questioning, the investigators may not harass, threaten, or promise rewards to the officer, as interrogators often do to civilian suspects. Bathroom breaks are assured. In Maryland, the officer may appeal his case to a hearing board whose decision is binding before a final decision has been made by his superiors about discipline. The hearing board consists of 3 of his fellow officers. In some jurisdictions, the officer may not be disciplined if more than a certain number of days, often 100 days, have passed since the alleged misconduct, which of course limits the time of the investigation. Sometimes the police department will give itself 2 years to release a video of one of its officers gunning down a black teenager with baggy pants. But here now, in this case, the officer has to have all the arguments marshaled against him within 100 days. Even if the officer is suspended, the department must continue to pay salary and benefits as well as the cost of the attorney. There's a quote from Reddit Hudson, a former St. Louis cop. We all know, either from personal experience or the experience of someone close to us, that there are officers that will violate citizens' human rights and civil liberties with impunity, and who are comfortable in the knowledge that the system will protect and cover up for their actions. These inequities have led inexorably to the current national crisis in community police relations. And the best way forward is to make sure we severely punish officers that violate the rights of the citizens they serve. They must be held accountable for their actions. And when we look at how remedies are made, even there is nothing but grief, because taxpayers pay these bailouts. Baltimore, $5.7 million since 2011 from lawsuits stemming from police abuse. Taxpayers in New York shelled out $1,130 per year per officer. There are 34,000 officers in the NYPD, and that's $38 million a year just to pay for damage to the public. In 10 years, Oakland, California, taxpayers paid up $57 million, and Chicago $33 million in one day alone to victims of police misconduct. And the officer sodomizing someone with the muzzle of his gun, and these kinds of cases are they're rampant because they're reported. And if there's even one that we hear about, there's only grief that we can feel. And so what I think we have to here in Chattanooga encourage is that the officers who take an oath to uphold the Constitution and to serve the public, that they really have that desire instilled in them every day. And I think Mayor Burke is on the right track. Mayor Burke, in his speech Friday, naming David Roddy as his chief of police, is exactly on the right track. He is on the right track, and that has to be policy. And I think the mayor, if the mayor heeds race reconciliators such as Franklin McCauley, if he does these things, he's going to have to consistently work down. Look, you're my police department. You serve me. I'm the mayor. You are part of the executive branch. You execute statute in Tennessee. There's something in Chattanooga. That's something Basil Marceau is questioning. But we're doing it for now, whether we have authority or not. We're pretending we have that authority. We're doing it. And I don't want people beaten. I don't want them abused. No one uses the F word, right? No MF in the force. If someone says MF or someone says damn or S or anything like that, guess what? You're going to get written up. No one uses bad language. It starts there. And then secondly, perhaps other reforms would be in the direction of having Miranda rights read routinely. Now, the reason that's not done routinely in Chattanooga is because people are terrified when they have their rights read to them because they know they're under arrest. The problem is they are under arrest, right? When the blue lights go off and you're traveling in your car, when the blue lights go off behind you, you are under arrest. State versus Garcia, 2003. Okay, that's clear. I'm rereading my copy of arrest in Tennessee jurisprudence. The blue lights equal arrest, and so if that's the case, Miranda has to be read. Now, what happens is if Mayor Burke says, we need to Mirandize everybody because that's the right thing to do, and it's required. It's required in the law. It's required by the high court. What would happen is this: there would be fewer arrests, right? There'd be less use of the blue lights because the officer would know if I'm using my blue lights on somebody, I'm going to have to read them their rights. And suddenly, the victim, if you will, in this commercial stop, that traveler, that motorist, that operator of a motor vehicle, that person is suddenly put on his guard, right? And suddenly that person says, well, wait a minute, where's my lawyer? I'm not making any statements. I'm not going to give you anything. I'm not saying anything. I'm not getting out of my car without my lawyer presence. I'm not conducting any tests without my attorney present, that kind of thing. Suddenly you have pressure to not have stops, right? There will be negative pressure against stops that are unwarranted, right? And that's what we want. That's what the people of Chattanooga want from the mayor and from coming Chief David Roddy. No stop, no encounter unless there's probable cause and there's an arrest. Okay. Friendly chat, friendly banter with the public, fine. But when there's an engagement before the law, there has to be law, right? Otherwise, you just have an officer acting privately. And we don't want to expose officers to that danger. David Tulis.
In-depth traffic, news, and information. Mornings on Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM.